What I'd like to focus on is this ever-growing population of English learners in our schools, and trying to take this very short period of time to dispel some of the myths about the education of these students. I've been working in this field for over 30 years, and I'm amazed that some of the myths and misconceptions and misinformation about this population of students persists over decades. And we really need to think about what the research tells us about second language acquisition, how these students learn. We have a lot of research left to do about precisely what are the exact kinds of strategies that will get the most bang for the buck and so forth. But we do have a fairly solid research foundation to build upon at this point. So I'm going to talk about just a few of those myths and hopefully give you something to take back and share in your schools to help educate these students even more effectively. I want to start off with a little levity. She says, I'm looking forward to less of the 3 R's and more R&R. So I thought this was apropos for this meeting because hopefully, even though we're doing a lot of thinking and listening and so forth, sharing, hopefully you're getting a little R&R in this beautiful resort as well. First, I want to start with who are our English learners, because as Brandon intimated, when we work in school districts or states, we really have that perspective. And I want to just pull the lens out a little bit and give you more of a national perspective on English learners. So in the past 3 years, what has been the growth of English learners in 15 states? I want you to show your finger. Is it, put up a number 1 if you think it's 25%, 100%, or 200%? 1, 2, or 3. Raise your fingers. Okay, we've got a variety of answers. Good. Actually, it's 200%. In Kentucky, they tripled their EL population in 3 years. So yes, as Brandon said, we think of California, Texas, New York, Florida. We've had English learners for decades. But there are lots of states where this population is continuing to grow. And in those traditional EL states, the populations are shifting. I'm sure you've heard on the news about all of the minor students that are crossing the border. Well, now a lot of the schools in California are being populated with those students that are recent immigrants without family. So even though we may have a certain type of student in schools, districts find that those students shift around and the demographics change. What percentage of English learners are Spanish speakers? Would it be 50%, 80%, or 90%? 1, 2, or 3, let's see. Okay, the correct answer is 80%. So even though you may work in a school where there are 10 different language groups and a few Spanish speakers, nationally, it is the largest group by far. And then in schools with low levels of poverty, that means just middle-class schools or affluent schools, 1 in 9 courses is taught by a teacher who's not fully certified. What do you think that is in high poverty schools? Is it 1 in 4, 1 in 6, or 1 in 9? Or is it the same or different? Fingers? Okay, most everybody got that one, that it's 1 in 4. So fully 25% of classes with the neediest students are not fully certified. And then what percentage of secondary students are long-term English learners? That means they've been designated as an English learner for 6 years or more. 22%, 59%, or 75%? 1, 2, or 3? Oh, a lot of people got this one right. Good, 59%. Now, 1 in 3 districts has over 75% long-term English learners. So I started out with this just to sort of give you a sense of the setting. We're talking about largely Spanish-speaking students, although certainly that's not the rule, and in some districts that they are the minority of the languages represented. By and large, students living in poverty, and then of course they have other challenges in school and out of school, either with non-certified teachers and then all of the challenges that come with being children of immigrants, being immigrants themselves, and so forth. So let's get started. The first myth is that English learners can't achieve high academic standards. This myth is rooted in low expectations for English learners, and a lot of that also goes hand in hand with low SES. There's decades of research that show that teachers tend to have low expectations for children who are disadvantaged, who come from low SES neighborhoods. Interestingly, that is a myth, because poverty or low SES is not the greatest single determinant of educational success or education failure. What is the greatest determinant of success for English learners is, one, their primary language development. So those students who come to us educated and perfectly fluent in their home language, then they need a year or two of transitioning into learning English. But they've already learned to read, they've already learned many math concepts and so forth. But that also speaks to the possibility of encouraging home language development through family literacy, reading at home in the primary language and so forth, because we do know a solid first language is very important for the success in the second language, and actually has benefits for the second language acquisition. But the other factor is effective instruction. So the onus is on us. And when we talk about long-term English learners, these students have been in our schools for 6 years or more and are not making adequate progress. So yes, there are some out-of-school factors, but there are certainly a lot of instructional factors that account for that. As some of you know, I've spent the last 20 years or so working on a model of instruction, developing and testing a model of instruction for English learners, the SIOP model. And as you look through the components, you probably think, well, gee, that's nothing that's earth-shattering, and it's really not. It's based on effective instruction for all learners. But please be certain that you understand that the features of effective instruction for English learners are critical for those students. Yes, it's helpful to repeat for English-speaking students. Repetition is a good learning strategy, but that is absolutely critical for English learners. Tying the information, new information, to what students already know or to their own personal background experiences is good practice for English-speaking students, but it's critical for English learners. So many of the features that you see, I believe it's in your handout, you'll notice they may seem familiar, but it's not so much a difference in kind as it is in a difference in degree. It's critical that these students receive the kind of instruction that's going to make the content understandable for them and also provide an opportunity to practice English so that they become fluent in English. So we've talked a little bit about this. A couple other speakers have made the same point, and that simply is that the Common Core is the objective. That's where we're headed. That's the outcome at the end of the year. Those standards are why we're teaching, because we want to move toward those standards. But the how is what's important. How do we get there? And the SIOP features or effective instruction for English learners is the way to get students to attain those standards. Now, my friend Katie yesterday told me a nice thing about their district who's been trained in the SIOP model, and she said she feels it really prepared them when the Common Core came, because they had the how, and now they have the what, and the teachers aren't freaking out because they've already had the how. So that was a nice thing to hear. What I'd like to do is to, instead of talking about a lot of different techniques or strategies or what's effective instruction for English learners, what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to feel what an English learner feels like when they are in the classroom, in your schools, in your district. I'm going to start out, we've already read a piece on this topic, and now I'm going to do a little bit of vocabulary work with you. I'm going to sort of step out from my teacher role and then explain what it is that I'm doing. So here we go. 我是老师，我说一点中文，不会说很好，可是我说一点。你们说不说中文？说不说？好。我们正在研究水汽污染。 水汽污染。这是干净的水，干净的水。重复，干净的水，干净的水。好，这是污水，污水，污水是不好，不好。这是污水，污水，污水。You're not getting those tones very well. Okay, so I started out by giving you a nice overview of what the lesson is going to be, reminding you of what we've been studying. And were you very clear before I showed the pictures exactly what we were going to be talking about? Not so much. It's very difficult, first of all, if you don't understand the language, which many of our English learners are at the beginning stages. But secondly, you don't even have the auditory acuity because it's a different language system, different sounds. You don't even have the auditory acuity to hear the sounds properly and replicate them. Okay, and I'm asking you to do some repetition, which is a good strategy. Now I'm going to provide another scaffold for you because you didn't do so well with the one. Okay. 干净的水 污水. Okay, now I've provided the written word for each of these. Is that helpful? No, because you don't know how to decode Mandarin Chinese. So sometimes we provide what we think are very helpful supports to English learners when they really are as meaningless as not providing. Okay, now I'll give you another level of support since you clearly need it. Okay. 干净的水，污水，很好。完成句子，完成句子，这是什么？这是什么？这是什么？ I am asking you a question. I didn't say repeat here. Okay. 这是什么？你们告诉一个人这是什么？告诉一个人这是什么？告诉一个人这是什么？这是什么？ Okay. Fine. All right. Who got it correctly? 这是好，干净的水，干净的水。Now, were you ready after repetition and visuals to now produce the language and remember that word? Some of you might have been a little bit, others of you not at all, okay? But the point is that we often think that after we've said something several times, surely they've gotten it by now, right? Surely they've gotten it by now. And you can see how many repetitions you would want before you were asked to produce this, especially with your peers. I was asking you to use the sentence frame. See, I provided that nice scaffold for you, but to then tell a peer what that was. Okay, and the same here. 这是什么？污水，污水，很好。Okay, so what I'd like you to do is just take a second and debrief this troubling, difficult kind of lesson. What was the most challenging and what would you have wanted? What other supports would you have wanted? 15 seconds, go. Okay, what was most challenging? Some table report out. What was the most challenging? The sounds, something that we very often overlook when we're speaking English. Surely everybody understands what we're saying, especially when we talk so fast and they can't tell one word from another because every word goes right together. Okay, so just the sounds alone. And then what scaffolds or other support would you have wanted? Feedback? Right. Translate it for you. Good. Anything else? Right. Right, I tried with gestures, and so some teachers don't even, if I had just stood up here doing the entire lesson, as many teachers do, you would have no clues. So I don't want to take a lot of time with this, but I just wanted to let you get the feel for being a second language learner as I move through the presentation with that experience in mind. So I see Common Core as an opportunity for our English learners, and many people say, what? We are scared to death about what's going to happen with our English learners with the Common Core, but actually the Common Core has many elements that are very consistent with what we've been talking about as best practice with English learners for a long, long time. The speaking and listening standards, the emphasis on collaboration, on using academic language in a variety of ways. And so I see Common Core as a very good opportunity. What I'd like to do is just provide you with an idea for a kind of a lesson that is consistent with what Nell Duke talks about with the expanded role of text. It's more than just words on a page. And we know from research that our English learners can learn some of those foundational skills very similarly to English speaking students, right? So they don't need a lot of accommodation when it comes to decoding and so forth, although from your experience you can see it might be more of an emphasis on making those sounds a little clearer for the students. We can't assume that they can hear everything that and process the kinds of sounds that we're making with decoding. But those foundational skills come relatively easily. But when it comes to comprehension and taking it to the next level, that's where we kind of run into problems sometimes with English learners. So I'm suggesting that we consider relevant student-centered sort of cross-curricular lessons that provide students with lots of opportunity to do just the kinds of things that all the speakers have been talking about. Here's an idea. So the students play the role of a scientist who makes recommendations to environmental organization about how to protect endangered animals in an ecosystem. So what the students are going to do is research the topic, gather information. They're going to prepare a short film, a brochure, a PowerPoint, an ebook, a website, whatever. They have the option. So here we're going to tap into students' interest. They're going to be so much more motivated and engaged to do this because they get to do what they're good at. You know, Doug said something about, when we talked about perception, we're always focusing on what students can't do. Let's give them an opportunity to shine. What are they good at? What are they interested in and want to learn more about? So they can demonstrate their knowledge through a variety of ways. And then they could even take it a step further for a larger audience to design a public awareness campaign. They could participate in a habitat restoration field work, or they could even write letters to government officials about the endangered species. So this just gives you an idea of kind of thinking out of the box in ways for students to use reading and use language in a variety of ways. So the team member roles would depend on, again, you need to know your students, right? You need to know who your students are. I saw the other day in the park by my house, this father was, pitching to this, just a little guy, and he was pitching overhand really hard. And, the kid would like swing and miss and swing and miss. And I'm thinking, what a jerk, as a mother, I'm like going, that guy's just like this big and, he's, get out of it, why don't you pitch him a little slow ball? And all of a sudden the kid hit a ball super far. Then he pitches hard again, he hits the ball again, and I thought, okay, That dad knows his student, knows his son. You know, with our English learners, sometimes we throw hard balls at them that they don't have any chance of getting, but we don't either want to just do this little baby slow pitch when they can actually hit the ball very far. So know your students when you assign these kinds of roles. Organize based on their strengths and interests as well as language proficiency. And of course, then you can have students working together with lower proficiency and higher proficiency working together. Somebody's going to write and edit content. Someone else is going to create the art content using Photoshop or another program. Record audio and video performances to be used in the project. Upload and manage the web content. Somebody may not be super proficient in English, but they may have enough English and work with somebody else to be able to do something like this. Using cell phone cameras to document the process for their publicity campaign. There are just innumerable resources now available for kids to go off on their own, researching you know, short videos. And a lot of English learners actually like the History Channel because it's got lots of clues. If you talk to your English learners, a lot of them watch the History Channel. So they're familiar with some of these things. So they get to work on what they want. Now think about the kind of academic language that this takes though, and that's what we suggest that teachers always do in planning, is to think about the language demands of that lesson. We're asking students to understand and use vocabulary. The objective said that they're supposed to analyze, interpret, find evidence, resources, ecosystems. There's a lot of vocabulary they need to know. They're going to investigate resources, read with comprehension. They're going to have to take notes. So you can see that even though this is a really interesting, fun sort of project for students, they're really using a lot of language and literacy skills in this project. And then everyone will contribute to a written product. So some of you may be thinking, oh, my English learners could not do any of that, especially reading dense text and so forth. So I wanted to just show you a video clip from one of our research sites where the students are employing this read aloud, think and summarize. When we first did this, we were calling it read aloud, think aloud, so the teacher will refer to it as that. But it's really read aloud, think and summarize technique. Okay. I think if I click, it's going to go back. Doug had this issue yesterday. Let me see. Mr. Technology, do we have any suggestions? Let me just click it real quick and see. I think it's going to go to the next. Aha.
Read aloud, think aloud, they thanked me. It took me, I knew what it was for 2 years before I would teach. I was like, I'm not going to tell them to read and then talk about it, read and talk about it. That's tedious. And then when I did it, they said that they learned how to read that day. I mean, a couple kids were like, thank you, I know how to read so much better today for that. All right, and what do we do when we do read aloud, think aloud?
I read, I say it, you read, she says it.
Okay, you read, you say what happens, he reads a paragraph, he says what happens. All right. As soon as your predictions are done, go ahead and start reading together.
Okay, so you can see they're doing that collaborating, trying to co-construct meaning, reviewing things. They both couldn't come up with the one vocabulary word, right? So that talks to the importance of having maybe word walls or some kind of a bank of vocabulary that are referenced for those students. For example, and again, there's just so much now on the internet with teachers posting things. Here's like an idea of a scaffold for evidence-based terms, just to have it up there. So as those two students are talking together, if they can't really articulate exactly what they're thinking, they have a reference here to say, well, according to the text, or like I say, the word bank of words that are required. One thing I wish Tim were here, one thing I would disagree slightly with Tim on is that when he said some of the basic words you don't need to define and practice because the text defines it. Okay, if I asked you to have Gangjin de Shui and find the meaning within a text of other Chinese words, right? Those words were critical, and so just going over those and repeating those numerous times is going to help students then when they get to the text, they'll even recognize that that is a main word. So I do think for our English learners it's slightly different. For English speaking students, Tim's probably absolutely right, but for English learners, you experienced how many repetitions you need to make a word make sense and for you to really be able to recognize it when it comes into text. Okay, so meeting high standards, what are some things that we can do is to provide choice for students, tap into their interests, honor risk-taking. You know, we were saying that when you walk into a classroom, you can tell right away, you get a sense of the culture of that classroom. Is it a collaborative classroom? Are students respected? Do they feel comfortable taking risk? We know that positive emotions have a relationship to academic achievement. So we want to create an environment that's safe and that we honor their risk-taking attempts. And then make learning relevant. Tap into what they know, what they're interested in, what their own experiences are. Mark my word, education for English learners, for immigrants and children of immigrants and kids in poverty is very different. It's a different experience than it is for an English-speaking student, particularly a middle class or upper middle class student who's grown up in this country. So we want to find out what do they know, what are they interested in, what are their own experiences, and let them express their life experience through the learning. Value their voice goes hand in hand with that. And then differentiate assessment choices. In that unit that I was showing you, or the extended day, multi-day lesson that I showed, you know, they had a variety of assessment options available to them. Do all of those adequately express their knowledge and skill? Absolutely. They all had to write something, they'd have to read resources, and then they came up with a product. And then include in lesson plans tasks and prompts that get students engaged in discourse. It's not going to happen if you don't plan for it. That think, pair, share, which none of us are critics of think, pair, share. It has its role, but it's not extended discourse. It's not the kind of collaborative conversation that's going to really give students the opportunities to use academic language in a meaningful way and develop their academic English. Too many classrooms, it's the teacher who's actively engaged, and students are passive, and I say in quotes, participants in learning, because in too many cases, the students really aren't even learning. They're just nice kids sitting there passively. So we really, to get students to meet high academic standards, we need to engage them in relevant, meaningful lessons. Okay. The second myth is that English learners will pick up the language through exposure. Oh, I wish this were true. We would all be multilingual, right? Living in some of the places where we live and hearing multiple languages. That's very important. But I'll give you an example. I spend part of the year in Spain every year, and of course with the internet, work follows you wherever you go, so it doesn't matter where you're sitting working, right? But it's a wonderful experience for me in my field because I'm always reminded of what it feels like to be a second language learner. I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, but it's not my first language. And so therefore I run into situations like just happened a couple of weeks ago where I needed some hairspray, and I went into the store, and so I read Spanish, so I find the hair products, and I see the can here, Tresemme, and I see fuerte, so I need that with this baby fine hair, I need something fuerte. And so I'm using all my good context clues, right? And I get my can of hairspray and some other things, and we go home. And so we're gonna go out to dinner. I wash my hair, get it all ready to go, and spray mousse all over my hair and my clothes. Just a stream of mousse. Okay, now I've learned laca is the word for hairspray. I just was missing that one critical word. I had a lot of other words. I used context clues. I used experience by knowing, what the can looked like. I just missed that one word. And so that's what our English learners go through all day long. There are so many vocabulary words out there that there's just, and English has more vocabulary. I mean, Dr. Baer will tell you that. I mean, it has more vocabulary than many other languages. We use a new word for almost every single label. So we've got to bear in mind that our English learners have twice the load because they're learning the same rigorous content. They're learning about endangered animals just like someone else is. However, they're doing it in a different language. They need to learn a lot of even the conversational expressions and vocabulary as well as academic language and vocabulary that's needed in school. So they really have got twice the load in all of our lessons. And we hear a lot about academic language. Those of us in second language, it's, Jim Cummins kind of coined that term, making that distinction between conversational and academic. Now it's gained a lot of popularity with the Common Core in particular, because we know that it's a specific way of using language that's not typically encountered every day. So when you interact with your family, when kids are texting or you're emailing, even using technology, that's generally not academic language. Academic language is grammatically dense, it's more formal, it's just the academic register found in school, the more sophisticated vocabulary, the complexity of the sentences, the rhetorical forms, all that kind of language that's used strictly in academic settings. And so we still hear teachers say, well, he speaks English, but he just doesn't want to do the work. Because I hear him speaking English, he doesn't want to do the work. Well, he can't do the work because it's at a completely different language level than just being able to speak the language. In fact, researchers aren't limiting any longer their study of academic English to second language learners. Now there's a lot of work being done on analyzing the academic language of text because we know that all of our students struggle with that more sophisticated kind of language that we use in schools. So oftentimes English language arts teachers or English teachers will tell us, well, I already do language. I mean, I'm using academic language all the time in class, and so students are going to pick it up, and that's, like I say, the myth, because it needs to really be explicitly taught to students. It contains both, there are general terms of academic language as well as subject specific. So for example, demonstrate, analyze, summarize, your students are going to hear that across classrooms. But when you get to things like metaphor, analogy, point of view, that's pretty much happening in English language arts. And it involves more than just vocabulary. We so often think of academic language as vocabulary development, but Tim brought up the idea of the syntax is challenging. That long sentence length, and a lot of times it's third person, and there's just a lot of complexity with the language itself. They have to learn the prosody of how you read. Tim did a beautiful job of reading that passage. Would all of our students, would any of our English learners be able to read with that same prosody and flow and inflection that's appropriate? So there's just so much to learn about academic language besides just vocabulary. So in our work for a couple of decades now, we have been encouraging teachers to think about the language demands of a lesson and then have a language objective in every lesson. And you'll see it in the Wonders program. We do that because it's important to make that language transparent both for the teachers, and our teachers in our research have have told us that when they have a language objective posted, it keeps them honest, right? Because they're reminded of the language they're supposed to be developing. Whether, as I say, it's a collaborative conversation. We've actually had lessons that were designed where there was a lot of collaborative conversations in the lesson plan, but when we go in to observe the teacher delivering the lesson, it's all teacher dominated. Where they were supposed to break up into groups, the teacher decided, I'll just plow ahead and just say it all myself. So it has to really be planned, and when we have the language objective posted, it is a reminder to teachers to put into practice those language features that they want the students to use. And it also makes language transparent to students. Why do we keep it a secret what we want students to learn that day? And I'm very firm in my conviction that both content and language objectives need to be specific. What are these students going to know and be able to do at the end of this lesson that they didn't know as well or weren't able to do as well when the lesson started? Those kind of incremental gains in skill acquisition, in practice using English, are what's going to give us those kind of improvements over time for some good outcomes. It doesn't just magically happen. We have to be very specific about what are the language demands, what are we going to practice with these students. Here's an example of the language objectives. Determine what students need to know about language, and then this teacher just had them for every lesson throughout the day. The content and language objective were posted so students know. And then it also helps you assess students' performance because you know what you're aiming for, what you're emphasizing in that lesson, what's the focus, and then at the end, are they able to do that? Students definitely are paying attention as well. The second grade class in Kansas City, the students had been reading how-to books. And the assignment was think of something you know how to do and write a how-to book of your own. So this Angelica wrote a book, How to Make Popcorn. So you see there, written by Angelica, illustrated by her. And the teacher said she was shocked when she saw the first page of the text. It was content objective, and she actually wrote beautiful objectives. You will pop a bag of popcorn without burning, and the language objective, you will read a how-to book, and then she has the materials up there listed too. So if we don't think that students are watching and paying attention and internalizing what the teachers are doing, so this is just a little idea about the importance of having that language objective. I mentioned earlier on the LTELs, or long-term English learners. How many raise your hand if you have not heard the term LTEL? Yeah. You're going to be hearing more and more about it because unfortunately, well, we've had these students for a long time, but now they've been given a name, and we're going to be having, this will be a growing population, unfortunately. They are students that have more than 6 years designated as an English learner. So if they started kindergarten with us, they're in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and they still are an English learner. How can that happen? Well, 59% of secondary students, many of those that came all the way through our school system, K to high school, and they're still English learners. 1 in 3 districts, as I mentioned, 75% of them have English learners that are long-term English learners. So in many cases, these students just get passed along. They're passive, they're disengaged, and unfortunately, in many ways, they're invisible. They're nice kids, they're not the troublemakers, they're not acting out so they don't get anybody's attention, but they're just doing kind of minimal achievement, and they just get passed along. What we need to do is focus on academic language. They're not going to pick it up just by being in the classroom and being around English. Yes?
Thank you for taking my question. What we've had a history of is that they then get identified as students with disabilities with speech and language disorders.
Yeah. You know what? I'm not going to address that right now because that's a whole talk that I give, the intersection of special ed and English learners. But I'll talk to you at the break about that. And that is a huge problem because once they've been in our schools with our mediocre instruction in terms of English learners, then we start labeling them as having a problem or not really sure if they have a problem or not. So that's a whole can of worms right there. I'm glad you brought it up though, because it is a huge issue. What these kids need is explicit instruction in the various aspects of language. For language objectives, some of your states have ELD standards. You can look at your ELA standards. We just need to have systematic treatment of language across time so that students are learning the language and that errors are being corrected. See, I think that we have this idea that English learners, well, they'll get it later. They just need more time. And so we don't take time to actually point things out to them that they're misusing. And as we've heard, you know, practice makes permanent. So if they've had 3 years of using ungrammatical forms that no one has ever taken the time to correct either their speech or in their writing, just thinking, of course, they're going to get it later with more time. No, they don't get it with more time. They just practice it more. It becomes ingrained, and then we have these long-term English learners. I can't help it when I'm, you know, just in this world, I'm always looking at these kinds of issues and things. How many of you ever have heard or used the term yourself, oh, no problemo, no problemo, right? You hear that, no problemo. Okay, it's a pet peeve of mine. Why? Well, because that they're using like a little Spanglish there, Spanish and English, right? Except that problemo does not exist in Spanish. And no one ever corrects it, and it's become a very popular little saying, no problemo. In Spanish, nouns are either feminine or masculine, okay? So if it's casa, it's feminine, la casa, el perro, okay? Every noun is masculine or feminine. Now, there are some words that have a Greek origin if they end in MA, even though they end in an A, the MA indicates they're masculine. And so, el sistema, el drama, el programa, there's lots of words that are used that are this Greek origin. And Spanish speakers know that they're taught that explicitly, so they use those words, el sistema. What would it be for problema? El or la? El problema. It falls into that category of words, el problema. There is no such thing as problemo. Okay? Please do not use that. If you want to be Spanish, you just say, no problema. But this is just a fun kind of example of how we let things go and let things go with kids instead of doing a lesson or a mini lesson or having it as the language objective for a lesson, to really explicitly show them this kind of thing so now they understand and then give a lot of practice. So hopefully with that kind of attitude and approach to teaching, we will have fewer long-term English learners. Here's just another one that cracked me up. Equipaje is the plural, right? We have suitcases or we have baggage. It's a singular word, right? But they said baggages. Somebody needs explicit instruction right there. Okay. The third myth is that English learners aren't motivated to do well in school. And this is a pervasive myth that even if teachers don't admit that they feel this way, I think that there's a lot of lunch talk sometimes about how kids aren't really motivated, or English learners in particular aren't really motivated to do well in school. And every study that's been conducted, it's really kind of amazing the high aspirations that families have. I mean, a lot of English learners, their parents had to overcome quite a bit to immigrate to this country, or they themselves. Think about these minors that are coming from Central America through Mexico to get to our schools. It's incredible. You don't think they're motivated? So when they come to school, why do they look not so motivated to us through our lens? When obviously their parents have high aspirations for them and they do for themselves. Well, there's a whole body of literature on causes of demotivation, and I've referenced a few. One is just lack of positive relationships. And this comes from some research studies that have been done in interviewing students and so forth. And if they don't have good friends, if they don't have a relationship with the teacher, those positive relationships often hook kids into feeling a part of the school. But unfortunately, as I mentioned with the long-term English learners, they really are a bit of an invisible part of the school. People don't necessarily talk to them that much. One of the things that I say, again, CCSS is an opportunity, is that with that collaborative conversation, with some research that we did, Claude Goldenberg and I did in the 90s, on instructional conversation, which is basically a collaborative conversation. There's so many parallels between the Common Core and what our work was about. But what we found, yes, students were engaging more. They improved their English, they improved comprehension. However, one of the side benefits was they started being really nice to one another, much more polite, holding the door for each other, because they got to know one another and develop relationships through those collaborative conversations. So we want to develop positive relationships for students. And then an awareness of disrespect toward their culture or their ethnicity. Again, this is very subtle. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's not so subtle, but a lot of times it is subtle. In Ruby Payne's work, she asked students, how do you know when your teacher respects you? And it's actually pathetic what they said. It's that he calls me by name. She answers my questions. They acknowledge me when they see me in the hallway. Wow. To them, that meant a lot of respect, which of course means it doesn't happen very often. So even the most simple sort of acts of kindness and just being polite to students, it transmits an idea that we are being respectful of them and their culture. A perception that class assignments or tasks are irrelevant. We hear that from a lot of students, but that is one of the reasons why students aren't motivated if they don't see the benefit. So we can try to make it seem more relevant to them, or we can give them the kind of assignments that I showed you earlier that are going to ignite some kind of enthusiasm and engagement and interest in the lessons. And the last one is perception of threats. And of course, it is a reality that many of our students, both outside school, on their way to school, and within school also, have that perception of threat. And it really does actually impact learning. There have been a number of studies that show that the effect that has on students' ability to learn, and just the impact that it has on the brain when you've got the threat. But they also pointed out that just the culture of the classroom can also feel threatening. And when we were talking about that, the culture of a school or a class, that you feel that it's very collaborative, it's honors, risk-taking, and so forth. The opposite is also true. I mean, I've walked into too many schools that from the front desk on, you feel like if you don't say just the right thing, you're gonna be in trouble with somebody. And the same thing in the classroom. I've been in kindergarten class not that long ago that was almost entirely English learners, and the students were all kind of separated around the classroom working on worksheets. She knew we were in observing. She had them working on worksheets, and then all of a sudden she stopped what she was doing and she said, "Who's humming? I can hear somebody humming. Who's humming? Okay, we'll do singing later today. Just knock it off." Kindergarten, okay? So we wonder why it doesn't have to be bodily harm threat. It can be emotional kind of feeling. These little kids come to school. This is their first experience with school, right? So we need to think very carefully when we attribute things to students, like they aren't motivated, they cannot achieve high standards, they're going to just pick it up being in my class and being in the school. They're in this country. It's just going to come to them. And we need to think about what we can do every single day to improve the achievement of English learners and to improve their acquisition of academic English. It's the greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it's too low and we reach it. Thank you very much.